Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Okay guys, so we are in another entry of Mission Marple. Now I should note that this is going to be the last Mission Marple for about a month. We'll check back in at the end of May, whatever that last Friday in May is, and we will resume at that point with The Mirror Cracked, which is a personal, well, the book isn't necessarily a personal favorite, but the movie though, the movie is a personal favorite, and I think I'm gonna try to plan to do a live stream of my review of the movie. But we are going to be taking about a month off. I think this will be a good time for everybody who wants to keep up, to catch up a little bit if you've been a little bit behind, or to get a little bit ahead if you need to. Just gives people a little bit of grace. I was going to do a midpoint check-in, I think on the 10th maybe, kind of like early-ish May, and I've decided I'm not going to do that. I have some unexpected work travel that I'm going to be doing, and I think for me to have the time to really like make that worthwhile, I just don't think I'll have time to do that. So we're just going to have a total like month off. So I will see you guys back, the 24th or 27th, somewhere in there of May, to talk about The Mirror Cracked. But for now, today we are talking about 450 from Paddington, also known in the US, I think, as What Mrs. McGillicudy Saw. And I think also there's a version of this that's called Murder, She Said. Kind of like Murder, She Wrote, which is my everything, but a little different. But I've always known this book as 450 from Paddington, so that's what we're gonna go with. And if you've never seen a Mission Marple video before, quick rundown of how these work. I will start by giving you a brief synopsis up roundabouts to where we find a body. Then I will talk a little bit about character details, themes, and my general impressions of the book. And then we will segue into a spoiler-filled section during which I feel free to spoil anything in the Agatha Christie canon. So when you see spoilers up on the screen, I'll talk about whatever I want. But we'll start with the non-spoilery part, and yeah, let's just dive into this bad boy. Also, apologies if you hear more noise in this than normal. That's because my neighbor is having some work done on their house, and them's the breaks. So it's not me, I promise. I just can't control what my neighbors do. So let's get into this. Okay, so 450 from Paddington opens up with Mrs. Elspeth McGillicudy, who is from Scotland, getting on a train out of London after having spent the day Christmas shopping for her grandchildren, and she is on her way to St. Mary Mead. I wonder who she's gonna see. But anyway, so she gets on the train and she promptly starts to take a nap, and upon awakening, she glances out the window and there is a train that is running in parallel to the train that she is on. And on that train, she sees a man strangling a woman to death. She can't totally see either of them fully clearly, but enough to understand what's going on and vaguely be able to identify them. She freaks out and calls the conductor, but by the time everything goes down, there's no evidence of this. And the conductor basically thinks that she's just sort of like an old woman and she was dreaming, but didn't realize that she had woken up. So he basically doesn't believe her. So she gets off the train and she goes to stay with her friend, shocking Miss Jane Marple. So we get Miss Jane Marple in the story from the beginning, which is great. And Mrs. McGillicudy immediately tells Miss Marple what she saw. And Miss Marple knows Mrs. McGillicudy enough to think that like, hey, she's not one kind of prone to hysteria or exaggeration or anything. And she takes her at her word and believes that this happens. So she says, okay, well, you know, if this happened, there'll be a body if the woman died. And so like, let's just check the papers tomorrow. They check the papers. Nobody's reported this. So they decide to go to the local inspector who knows Miss Marple because duh, she is like the hero of St. Mary Mead, saving them from the savageness that they apparently live in on a day-to-day basis, with people getting like coshed on the head with hammers and poisoned and like all kinds of crazy shit's happening in St. Mary Mead. Anyway, so he knows Miss Marple, he knows her reputation, and he says like, hey, you know, I know that if Miss Marple believes this, there's probably something to it. So he reports it and basically says like, hey, we'll take it from here. You've done your duty. But that's not quite enough for Miss Marple. She really feels this weighing on her conscience. So she decides that she is going to undertake at least figuring out who is dead and like trying to figure out who did it. So she does some sleuthing. She takes a couple of trains to time things out. And what she realizes is that she basically pinpoints geographically where she thinks the body probably would have to have been disposed of if it was disposed of off of the train. And she enlists a woman. We'll probably talk more about this whole rest of the book, honestly, in the spoiler section, because I don't want to give too much away. My intention in this section is always to like leave you wanting more so that you would still enjoy the book. But let's just say she enlists some help because she recognizes her own frailty and inability to kind of get around the way she would like to. Agatha Christie points out that she is 89 in this book, which means that by the last Miss Marple book, she would have had to be in her hundreds, right? Or like 110, I don't even know. So anyway, she kind of says like, hey, I can't go like rooting around for this body. I need somebody to help me do that. So she enlists some help, and suffice it to say, it's a Miss Marple book. Eventually she's going to figure it out. But along the way, we get involved with a family called the Krakenthorpes. And so we get into a lot of their drama. There's a kind of country house that they live in called Rutherford Hall that's also involved. We get involved in that whole community. And we also have Inspector Craddock coming back in. We last saw him in A Murder is Announced. If you'll remember, he is Sir Henry Clithering's nephew / godson. And we love Sir Henry Clithering, like he's the best. So yeah, I think that's about all I want to say in terms of plot, and probably for now also in terms of characters. So let me get into my general impressions and a couple of theme things, and then I have some things to say in the spoiler section. So in terms of my impressions of this one, it's kind of tricky because so this was written in 1957, and I think we are rapidly in the phase of Christie's career, because I was looking at some of the ones that are kind of around the same time period, where she still has a lot of good ideas and a lot of good premises. I don't know that she always executes on them as well as I would like. And I think the setup of this, the idea of you seeing a murder take place in a parallel running train, because if you've ever been on a train, I think you can picture exactly what she's talking about, where there's these moments where they happen to be running at the same kind of speed and in the same direction, where you really can just see directly into another car. So I think it was a really cool idea to have that be the setup for the murder. Also, there's this discussion about corridor versus non-corridor cars that I didn't understand until I looked it up, but basically in this period there would be non-corridor train cars where you could not leave your car while the train was in motion. So the only way in or out was like outside of the train. So like conductors can't come in and out to take your ticket. You can't like go to the bathroom or anything. Like you're stuck in your car from station to station. And so that's part of it, is that the person who has set this murder up thinks like, hey, there's no way in or out of this compartment. No one's going to interrupt me. But they don't think about the fact that somebody could see them from the outside. So like that's a super cool premise. I like that. It also has a lot of country house feels, which I guess I'm realizing that Marple just has more of than I had remembered her having. And I like that. Like I always like that in a Christie. I do though just think that execution wise, this isn't there. I can't totally put my finger on why, but something about the execution of this just doesn't feel like it's her strongest. There is a heavy reliance in a couple of plot points on coincidence that I think strains credulity, and we can talk about that when we get to the spoiler section. So I think that's part of it. I think that, I don't know. I think maybe because I'm reading this chronologically, this has a lot in common, I think, with A Pocket Full of Rye. Not necessarily in like the outcome, but just in the elements and the type of story it is, and even some of this kind of story beats. I also think there's a lot of parallels to this in Crooked House, just in terms of some of the family dynamics that are going on. So I think it just feels like maybe not as good of a version as those books do. I don't know. I was a little, I don't know. I just wasn't as warm on this as I wanted to be. Like, that being said, I have yet to rate one of these Miss Marple books less than a 3.5. And I think I probably have settled on a 3.5 for this. I would be hard pressed to tell you if I liked pretty much this, A Murder is Announced, and They Do It With Mirrors, I have pretty similar feelings about. Like, they're all just sort of in there together for me. You know, I guess I will have to sort of make some nuances in terms of my rating of which ones I like better, but like, they're all perfectly good, perfectly competent Christies, and they all have, I think, cool setups. They Do It With Mirrors, I think, on a technical level, is not as good as A Murder is Announced or 450 from Paddington. I just personally happen to like that one a lot. So I don't know. I guess I would probably say I would go, top of my list is The Murder at the Vicarage, then The 13 Problems, then A Pocket Full of Rye, then The Body in the Library. And then I just get confused about what to do with this. I mean, I guess technically then They Do It With Mirrors, because just personally I liked that one better. And then I would probably put this and a Murder is Announced tied together. In terms of which one is more iconic, I guess I would put A Murder is Announced a little bit above this one. And then last is The Moving Finger. But none, like I say that, none of these have been bad so far. Like all of these are good, and considering how late we are now in Christie's career, like we are in 1957, like that's doing pretty darn good, because we're approaching a part of her career where things are much more uneven. And I think I probably can start to say that with the next one, if I'm remembering rightly, on The Mirror Cracked, because as much as I love that movie, I don't think the book is one of the best ones in her works. So anyway, all that to say, all in all, like my lowest rated one is a 3.5, and I still liked that one. So these are all really good. And this one is kind of in that category of, yes, I think I would ultimately probably give it a 3.5, but it was still really enjoyable to read. It has the Hallmark Christie tone, and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of just my impressions, those are my thoughts. And then in terms of some non-spoilery thematic things, so one of the things that really struck me is that this is one of the first Marples that I think is like really, you can feel its time period. And I think some of that is because people are out and about more in the world, more so than Miss Marple books normally are. So, you know, you get references to like the Russians. So like you get some Cold War stuff. You get allusions to UFOs and flying saucers, and Mrs. McGillicudy is buying her grandson a space gun for Christmas. So like you get some of the sort of like, you know, looking to space and the space race and all that kind of stuff alluded to. You definitely, in terms of like social history, hear a lot about taxation on the wealthy, and like everyone griping about that. That was just sort of a fact of post-World War II life, is that taxes were really high and resources were really scarce. It was hard, like if you managed to be rich in this time period, like you were going to pay a lot of taxes. So that was just part of the deal. And then we also get a lot of references to the scarcity of good domestic help. I think I'll talk more about that in my spoilery section. But, you know, so we've got a lot of kind of like hallmarks of the time period in this one, and I really enjoyed that. Like this feels like a book of 1957, and I enjoyed that piece of it. I don't think I need to get too specific on this, but I do think that we continue this kind of theme that I've been talking about in the previous books about Miss Marple as sort of an avenging fury, or like her rage is directed towards people who do these violent, terrible things, and how she's sort of like, she has a lot of pity for the victims, and she is pitiless against those who have done the crimes. Like at the very end, after she's giving away kind of the clue, and I won't say the name, I will X that out, but she says, everything they did was bold and audacious and cruel and greedy, and I am really very, very sorry, finished Miss Marple, looking as fierce as a fluffy old lady can look, that they have abolished capital punishment, because I do feel that if there is anyone who ought to hang, it is the killer. So, you know, that description of looking as fierce as a fluffy old lady can, like this idea that Miss Marple has a lot of like anger towards those who do these crimes. It's just I mean, again, female rage, like that is my theme of the Miss Marple reread. I definitely think you can see traces of that in this book as well. So again, overall, this was an enjoyable read for me. I would totally recommend it. I could see this being like a good place to start with Christie. Very solid. It just wasn't a personal favorite, but that's among a bunch of really excellent books. We are now more than halfway through this. I know I keep harping on this, but I'm 8 books out of 14 at this point, and I've given none of these less than a 3.5 star. I think that is an excellent track record, and I'll be curious to see as we move forward how many of the ones that we have left, because they are mostly in Christie's like lesser time as a writer, how I do with those, because so far these are all really great. Okay, so then moving into spoilers. First, something petty and juvenile, but I just have to get into this. I absolutely love in the climax and the denouement when Miss Marple is planning her little trap she's going to spring on Dr. Quimper, that it is contingent on Mrs. McGillicudy pretending that she has the shits and has to run upstairs. Like, I love the way that that is sort of alluded to and like talked around. That really cracked me up, that she's like, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into this house and you're immediately going to allude to the fact that you have to go take a gigantic dump and need to go upstairs. So sorry, the 12-year-old boy in me really did laugh at that. So I liked that. The character I wanted to talk about was Lucy Alsborough, I think. I just really liked her. She reminded me a lot of Mary Dove in A Pocket Full of Rye, in terms of like this really hyper competent and therefore very well compensated person, like housekeeper person. And I love that she's like trained mathematician, but she's seen this corner in the market on like charging a lot for providing domestic help. And she's just like exploiting the shit out of it. And I just loved that. And because she reminded me so much of Mary Dove, I was wondering if she was going to kind of have like some nefarious element and be on the take in some way, or if she was going to be involved in some way. And I'm glad to say that that's not really how things shake out, because that would have been such a huge leap of coincidence or conclusion or whatever. So I'm glad that that didn't happen. The coincidence that really bugged me in this was Lady, is it Stoddart West? Whoever, Martine, like that she happens to be lover of this man who dies in World War I, and then her son is friends with his nephew. Like, that was a coincidence too far for me. And I think that was the moment that I decided to officially downgrade this to a 3.5, just because I was like, I do think that the kind of wrap up of this, there is a lot of like coincidence and like perfection of timing happening. I don't know, the way that the doctor kind of works it out is a little iffy to me, but I don't know. I mean, again, I think I've said this before. I would always rather a mystery author err on the side of just like delighting me with ingenuity than having a boring but more plausible answer. I think this is a side, like this will err on the side of like, this delighted me with ingenuity, but I don't know that the payoff was quite good enough for me to fully excuse it. So I do think that there's some of that. As I was also saying, I just think you can really straightforwardly map a lot of the characters in the Krakenthorpe family back into the Fortescue family. And considering that these books are back to back, I also think that that invites comparison of this book to A Pocket Full of Rye, and in my opinion, in a way that is not as favorable. Like, I think every parallel this has to A Pocket Full of Rye, this is the lesser book. So I also wonder if this book had another one in between my reading, if I might have liked it better. But I think that's fair, because at the time, these would have been the two back-to-back Marples that people were getting. So I don't know. I think that there's some unfavorable comparisons there in terms of like, I just think A Pocket Full of Rye is a little bit better at the things that it shares with this book. And like I said, I also just think Crooked House has a lot of parallels character-wise to this. Like, it has like the grandfather who like made all the money, and then his sort of profligate offspring, and then like the grandkids really being where things are happening. So anyway, just side note, I also thought that was an important parallel. So like I said, I enjoyed this book. I don't think it's one of the best in the Marple canon, but I do think it's really good. And I think that that will do it for 450 from Paddington. So as I was saying, we are going to take a little bit of a break. I am going to be in the UK, so I'm hoping I can do a little bit of Agatha tourism. We'll see how that goes. Maybe, maybe not, depending on how well the work project I'm going for goes. If it goes well, I'll have more time. If it does not go well, I will be stuck in a sweaty conference room, so we'll see. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed your reread of 450 from Paddington if you are reading along, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having a super lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon.